500 years ago, this was the most pristine city in the world.
Exploding into a city of color.
¡Viva México!
¡Viva México!
Mexico City's color can be found on every street.
What country is Mexico in?
What's up, guys? It's Jason here, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Expat Insight. You might have seen my recent video, 8 Reasons Why You Need to Leave Mexico Now. So, you finally decided that you can't take any more Minneapolis winters, and you don't really want to go to California or Florida because everyone there is crazy. So you set your sights on Mexico, where the land is cheap and the beaches are still beautiful. Before you grab all your life's savings and decide to buy that condo in Acapulco you have wanted since before you got married, here are a few things you might want to consider. In this video, I'll break down the 20 things you need to know before moving to Mexico. Some of these are common, while others are things no one tells you about moving to Mexico. This is the most comprehensive video I've ever made. By the end, you'll have a high-level overview on everything you need to know and how to move to Mexico. I promise, from money, required documents, medicine, food, politics, culture, and everything in between about Mexico. These are things I wish I knew before moving to Mexico, and I'm happy to share them with you in this comprehensive video. But first, if you wouldn't mind just tapping that like button for the YouTube algorithm, I'd really appreciate it. The more engagement a video like this gets, the more likely the YouTube algorithm is to push it out for more people to enjoy. I hope you enjoy it. If you love Mexican food, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for new vids each week. Thanks for doing that, and now let's continue on with the plain truth about living in Mexico. Number 1. Money in Mexico. How much money to change into local currency is a very important question if you decide to move to another country. In Mexico particularly, having lots of cash is not recommended. Showing you have money in Mexico is an open invitation to the criminal elements to act against you. If you have money, keep it overseas, don't flaunt it, and make sure you keep your financial situation a tight secret. Also, please keep in mind that the Mexican peso is not a very stable currency. Call me an ignorant American, but I was really surprised to learn this in many countries overseas as I spent most of my life in America. I always kept my savings in dollars and never thought about it at all. There have been from time to time massive devaluations of the peso, which have literally destroyed fortunes. Even the most hardcore investor in Mexican businesses knows to keep a large part of cash flow in either dollars, euros, or even better, solid assets. Number 2. What documents do you need to go to Mexico? Most first world nations citizens coming to Mexico do not require a tourist visa to come. Europeans, Canadians, Japanese, Russians, and many others need not worry about procuring a visa to come into the country, and most are allowed to stay 3 months without problems. Citizens of poorer nations will have to consult with their local embassy to consultate about visa requirements, but mostly, if you have at least enough money to travel by air, you don't need to move mountains to come into Mexico as a tourist. Number 3. What kind of long-term residence documents do you need in Mexico? Before you get off a plane and fly to become a taco-munching, sombrero-wearing Mexican, think about how long you're going to stay. Mexico has served as a refugee for a number of immigrants throughout the ages, but the Mexican government generally gives preference to first-world immigrants, so if you're trying to move from, say, Venezuela, you might not find it as easy to move to Mexico as if you're a Canadian who is fed up with the cold. Residency requirements vary from country to country, but Mexico actually does welcome most folks who want to become Mexicans under certain rules. Give yourself plenty of time to study all the resources you need in order to make your transition to Mexico perfectly smooth and legal. Most illegal immigrants in Mexico are trying to get to the US, and the Mexican government usually bends over backwards to accommodate for them, finding them jobs and shelter. So if you're trying to move legally into Mexico, it should be an easy task. Again, your local consulate or embassy is the best source of information about this topic. Number 4. Land value in Mexico. It is true that in Mexico you can still buy land for pennies on the dollar. If you look around, you'll be able to find absolutely gorgeous virgin land for sale all over Mexico that is both a good investment and a good place to live. From beautiful beaches, dense jungles, arid deserts, mountain getaways, Mexico has it all. And the cost to buy can be so ridiculously cheap that it makes perfect sense to buy. But buyer beware, a lot of land in Mexico is actually communal land called ejidos, which give the landowner only partial ownership of their land. So let's say you buy a 200-meter square ejido for $5,000, and you want to build your dream house next to a beautiful river. Well, if you don't become part of the ejidatarios, the community might decide to take your land away. Also, be aware that even if you buy a regular property with an ordinary property title, many landowners in certain parts of Mexico have been driven out by cartels. So even if you buy a nice piece of land, you might have to fight it out against some really bad hombres to hold on to it. This is actually a big problem in many other countries around the world, so people in developing countries, be grateful for proper land title and ownerships. Number 5. Expat communities in Mexico. Certain parts of Mexico, especially around the beaches, are full of American, Canadian, and European expats who have chosen to live in Mexico because of the economic or cultural benefits, the climate, or maybe it's just the guacamole. Guacamole. You'd be amazed at the real power of guacamole. If you don't speak any Spanish or want to feel safer in the company of gringos like yourself, you don't need to look very far to find whole mini-cities, especially in the northern part of Mexico. Baja California has one of the largest numbers of American landowners. Tulum, Oaxaca, Veracruz, Acapulco, and other such tourist traps are known for having lots of Americans who own vacation homes. They're called patos de invierno, which means something like winter ducks because they fly into their Mexican homes in the winter, usually around January or February, and don't go back up north until spring. Interesting, right? Number 6. Crime and cartels in Mexico. Contrary to popular belief, crime cartels in Mexico don't really target rich foreigners. The reason is simple: you don't kill the goose with the golden eggs. Foreigners bring much-needed euros and dollars to Mexico, and the cartels don't want to lose this money. Cartels own restaurants and hotels all over the country, so if they go after the tourists, they lose as well. Americans are the largest consumers of drugs and prostitution in Mexico, so the cartels depend strongly on the spring break crowd to make their business work. Also, robbing, killing, or kidnapping foreigners is a whole lot more dangerous for the cartels to do because it attracts unwanted attention from federal and foreign government authorities. Every sicario in Mexico knows that the surefire way to get caught is to kill a gringo. Sadly, this is not true for third world immigrants who are constantly harassed, targeted, and even murdered by cartels who see them as an easy target since most of them are fleeing their own countries anyway. Number 7. Medical services in Mexico. Although medical services in Mexico don't have all the tools available of the finer ones in Europe or America, quality medicines and healthcare can be purchased for a fraction of the cost, and medical emergencies, simple treatments, and stuff like dental or laboratory work is exceedingly good and ridiculously cheap. There are groups of people who go to Tijuana and other border towns only to purchase their medications because the cost of buying them in the US is prohibitively expensive. Mexican doctors and specialists charge a fraction of what their US counterparts earn with the same training and qualifications. You can more or less multiply any surgical intervention by 10 to figure out how much you would pay back home. Number 8. Alternative medicine in Mexico. Mexico had amazing herbal and medicine lore previous to the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors, although much of that knowledge had to go underground with the arrival of the church, who considered much of this medical lore black magic. The fact is that local people, especially in many of the little villages, trust their local curandero, a kind of witch doctor or shaman, far more than they trust modern medicine, and for good reason. Herbal cures from anything from the common cold to cancer can be found in the hidden corners of Mexico, practiced by indigenous doctors who still cling to their ancestral medicines, and many of these cures could be considered miraculous. The ancestral use of animal venoms, peyote, mushrooms, and other psychoactive substances to cure a variety of mental and physical disorders is well documented. Number 9. Awesome food in Mexico. If you grew up in any big city anywhere in the US, more than likely, you have never really tried really fresh food. Fresh food is messy stuff, and supermarkets, grocery stores, and restaurants mostly never really deal with it. For instance, most fruit and vegetables in the US have been grown with industrial pesticides, even if they claim to be organic. Beef, pork, and chicken are routinely treated with antibiotics. Milk is super pasteurized. In Mexico, a great deal of food that makes it to market still comes from small family farms, so none of those civilized antibiotics and pesticides have even been applied to it. The result, if you're a connoisseur, are fruits that taste more like nature, meat that tastes more like meat, and vegetables that taste more like something that grew out of the earth. Also, the price of fresh vegetables, fruits, and other farm products is a very small fraction of what you find in the US. For instance, a $20 steak will be around $5 in Mexico. The abundance of seafood on the coasts, most of it right out of the fishing boats, leaves any US coast behind in culinary deliciousness. Mexico offers a variety of fruits not available in the US, like zapotes and mamayas. And then there is, of course, avocados. Number 10. Blondes do have more fun. It is no secret in Mexico that most Mexicans are partial to blondes and redheads. A sad history of a very tyrannical racial caste system has made it almost automatic that blonde people are treated with a certain privilege in Mexico, including romantic attraction. Mexican girls, some of them stunningly beautiful, are always on the prowl to nab a blue-eyed devil to whiten their progeny. The idea of grabbing a blue-eyed gringo and getting pregnant by him is pretty universal in Mexico, and most boys next door will be surprised at the attention they get from the opposite sex. Please be aware that all these girls have one universal goal of getting pregnant, married, and then moving to the USA. Number 11, being black or Asian in Mexico. Even rarer than blondes, black people are a true rarity in Mexico. Although there is a large community of Afro-Mexicans, especially in certain coastal towns like Veracruz, it is very rare to see folks of African descendants in Mexico. So, if you are of African ancestry and want to move to Mexico, be prepared to deal with folks staring at you. Not because they are necessarily racist, but because you are a rare, exotic human to them. The systematic racism practiced by the Spanish conquistadors and the church left a sad mark in Mexico that is not entirely healed. So if you are African, consider moving to one of the communities where you are not so uncommon for your own protection and comfort. Asians, particularly Japanese people, are viewed with a kind of curious awe by locals, who suffer like most other races on the planet of a kind of yellow fever for cute Asian girls. What is it about them? Number 12, the law in Mexico. Although Mexico City and some of the other larger cities like Querétaro and Monterrey have enormous police forces, the Mexican government does not control many areas in Mexico where cartels are the actual law. Even in Mexico City, there are zones where the police do not enter out of fear of reprisals. Once you actually move to Mexico, it will become crystal clear which zones are law-abiding and which zones are controlled by organized crime. The collusion of many local police forces with organized crime is an absolute factor when deciding where to live, because if you get into trouble, you will not be able to call upon the cops as you do go back home. Mostly, if you are not a bandido or a drug dealer yourself, you have nothing to fear from corrupt cops. Many government officials are on the payroll of the cartels, and state governors are constantly being accused of collusion. There is a sad, almost perverse logic to how all this works, because you have to remember that the USA is the principal consumer of all Mexican drugs, so the collusion and payoffs occur on both sides of the border, but for the most part in Mexico, most high government officials had to make deals with the mob to get their jobs. Number 13, things you don't want to have to buy in Mexico. Cars, computers, basic appliances, iPhones, tablets. All these items are usually extremely expensive because most of them are imported products and have strong tariffs on top of the price of the actual item. If you want to have a car in Mexico, you're better off buying in the USA and then legalizing it in Mexico. This is curious because Mexico is actually a car-building country, but somehow it is still far more expensive to buy a car in Mexico than in the US. The same is true for computers, cell phones, drones, and any other kind of sophisticated technology. This is also paradoxical because Mexico is an exporter of high-tech parts to Japan, the US, and other parts of the world. But like with automobiles, the fabrication of parts does not include the assembling of the completed product, so most high-tech stuff actually comes from the exterior. Number 14, setting up a business in Mexico. Multinational corporations like Coca-Cola, Walmart, Ford, Chrysler, Nestle, and Johnson & Johnson absolutely love Mexico because the local and federal governments will do anything to attract their investment, including but not limited to being utterly lax on labor and environmental rules and regulations, giving huge tax breaks, and basically handing over the golden keys to all the natural resources available. Canadian and other mining companies have done irreparable damage to numerous towns in Mexico with absolutely no repercussions. But if you're a small business owner and you want to expand your operations to Mexico, what are the real advantages? Quite a few, actually. Mexico is a growing economy, so investment from medium and smaller businesses is always welcomed. There's a lot of red tape when dealing with the Mexican government, but if you grease the right government official, all that red tape can disappear as quickly as a naked hippie at Burning Man Festival. The growing Mexican middle class is more than willing to spend money in franchises like McDonald's and Starbucks, and new products are always viewed with interest. Keep in mind that Mexico is not quite a first-world economy yet. However, most prognostics put Mexico at the top of the food chain as far as Latin America, always fighting with Brazil for that spot, but the proximity to the USA helps Mexico's case considerably. Number 15. Children and schools in Mexico. If you have kids, you have to really consider carefully moving to Mexico. Although Mexico is profoundly kid-friendly, and you can see kids playing outside and having good, healthy fun, if you look closer, you will see that many of those kids don't really have perfect lives. Some of them don't have shoes, others might have to work for a living, some are exploited sexually, and the vast majority do not know how to read and write. Public schools are in terrible disarray, with protests and strikes being common throughout the year. In some places, public schools do not even count on electricity, plumbing, and there's a scarcity of well-trained teachers. Most of the good schools are private and quite expensive. Rich people almost always send their kids to study abroad, either to Europe or the United States. Child trafficking and exploitation are endemic in Mexico, and there's a very real and dangerous child organ harvesting mafia in some towns. Mexican children are some of the most vulnerable at-risk groups in the world, and that is not likely to change anytime soon. Of course, some towns are better than others, but centuries of neglect and exploitation are not going to go away easily. Number 16. Driving in Mexico. If you like driving in a civilized, safe manner, please go back to America. Mexican roads, road etiquette, and in general anything to do with driving is an absolute horror, especially in the big cities where Mexican drivers really do believe that driving rules are there only to be broken. The state of most roads and streets is so utterly deplorable that unless you are into driving off-road or in the postmarked moon, you should probably stay out of them. Many vehicles in Mexico, which are considered roadworthy, would be utterly scrapped to the dustbin of road hazards in the States. In many small towns, pedestrians and livestock share the road with cars, so you might be stuck behind a burro that won't budge for an hour or two on the highway. Some of the most common accidents occur with cows, pigs, or horses suddenly jumping out of nowhere on the highway. Number 17. Public transport in Mexico. The recent and very scandalous accident on the Golden Line of the Mexico City Metro, which cost the lives of 25 people and left over 100 wounded, brought to light some of the problems with the subway system. But besides the metro, which is actually one of the safest ways to get around Mexico City, the problems with public transport on the surface are much worse. First and foremost are the combis, which are smallish 8 to 15 passenger vans that serve most of the city and are privately owned. Combis will get you to the more remote areas of the city where there is no metro or surface metrobus system, which is handled by the government. These combis are incredibly dangerous, being one of the principal targets for robberies and assaults. They're also not really monitored by the government, and the drivers all learn to drive playing video games. And no, not like Forza, more like Mario Kart. Accidents are common. If you venture into the smaller towns and villages, the situation is utterly absurd, with public transport being taken care of by various mafias, private cars which might or might not have a license. The incidence of pirate taxis all over Mexico just reaffirms the kind of lawless order that prevails over many municipalities. Do not be afraid though, pirate taxis almost always are there just for the passage and will not assault or rape. But of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. In order, the most dangerous professions in Mexico are drug dealer, police officer, food delivery person, and taxi driver. Number 18. Don't drink the water in Mexico. Before the arrival of the Spaniards, Mexicans were experts in water maintenance. The great city of Tenochtitlan was actually built on an isle in the middle of a great lake, the Lake of Texcoco, and as it grew, the Aztecs built little floating islands where they grew their most important crops, like maize and chiles. Aztecs were some of the cleanest people on the planet at the time, with enormous public and private baths where people went to clean themselves. Hygiene was a top priority for the natives. Then came the dirty, stinky, pest-ridden Spanish. Any semblance of hygiene that might have survived the conquista was lost. The Lake of Texcoco was filled with rubble and debris to make room for the stinkiest city on the planet, Mexico City. It's sad how the introduction from the Spanish have caused some of the stereotypes of Mexicans being dirty. It's really messed up. Undeniably, building a city over a lake that has been filled up with garbage is not a good idea. Add that to another sad fact, Mexico City is, in terms of land expansion, the largest city in the world, and you have the formula for an absolute watery disaster. A lake is a lake because it collects rainwater due to geographical conditions. No matter how much you fill it up, eventually it will become a lake again. Residual waters have nowhere to go. Now put 30 million people on top of the lake after filling it up with garbage. Do these waters go away? No! They just get contaminated with all the garbage. So yeah, unfortunately, Mexico City is sinking under its own weight, and the water treatment plants, fresh water sources, and every other conceivable method to prevent the absolute inevitable flooding which will occur every rainy season is just like clockwork. It's a bit like asking your kids not to get dirty if they go out and play in the mud. It's just not going to happen. Residual black waters will combine with freshwater sources, and the water will be contaminated regardless of how much chlorine you throw into it. The bigwigs at the government and city planning know this fact, but have little interest in changing the status quo. How do you move 30 million people out of a city anyhow? Number 19. The culture in Mexico. I'm sorry if the video has made you think that everything about moving to Mexico is horrible, because it isn't. There are many aspects of life in Mexico that are wonderful and magical. One of these aspects is culture. Mexico has a fabulous cultural heritage even before the arrival of the Spanish, and much of this cultural heritage is alive right now. From the numerous magical towns where the pre-Hispanic cultures still prevail, incredible ruins that must be seen to be believed, and one of the most amazing universities in all Latin America, the UNAM, which has already generated more than one Nobel Prize winner, Mexican arts and sciences have placed their mark on the world stage. Museums, archaeological sites, traditional celebrations, music, art, food. There is no end to the cultural marvels that you'll be able to experience once you move to Mexico. Number 20. Political stability in Mexico. Since its War of Independence from Spain, much like the rest of Latin America, Mexico has suffered from a lack of enlightened leadership. As a satellite state of Spain, Mexico's people were ruthlessly enslaved and exploited. When the Spanish crown no longer ruled Mexico, Mexico's people were ruthlessly enslaved and exploited. After many civil wars of reform against the US and France and other bloody conflicts that are so strange and senseless that just trying to explain them to an outsider boggles the mind, Mexico's people are ruthlessly enslaved and exploited. Right now, that exploitation and enslavement can be most clearly seen in the bloody and senseless war on drugs, which flourished with the fall of the Colombian cartels, when most of the illegal drug trade into the USA moved from Colombia to Mexico. The change of government from PRI to PAN to Morena hasn't really changed much of the basic problems with Mexico's economic and political stability. High government officials are still basically stealing from people, organized crime runs the government of many states, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Most folks don't believe in their government because the government betrays their hopes and dreams for a better Mexico. This is actually not so different from many other nations, it's just more evident and blatant. This constant betrayal of the most basic premises of a civilized nation is perhaps the reason why Mexicans not only tolerate, but in some cases even celebrate certain crime lords. It is quite ordinary to see shrines to Jesus Malverde in many homes in Mexico, a kind of Robin Hood of the drug trade who helped many poor people by building schools and hospitals and creating a kind of justice for towns where the government did nothing but come to steal from the weakest. The same can be said about El Chapo Guzman, who is now in US police custody. El Chapo helped innumerable poor people building infrastructure, giving people jobs, businesses, schools, and yes, even hospitals. So, does that make Mexico politically unstable? Well, it all depends on the desires of Washington, who are the real power behind the throne. And that brings us to today. In conclusion, if you want to move to Mexico and better your life, there are many ways to do so. Keep in mind that you are leaving the first world for a developing nation, so you will notice that certain services and benefits you take for granted, like clean water, might not be available. But then again, if you live in Flint, Michigan, clean water is also not something you find either. Your kids might have to go to private school, and you might have to make friends with your local drug dealer instead of denouncing him to the cops, who are probably the ones who are really behind his activities anyhow. But if you can handle such cultural differences, you might just discover that Mexico is the perfect place for you. That weird witch doctor who howls at night when there's a full moon might just know how to cure your problems with diabetes and hypertension. Your kids will grow up to know that ancient aliens ruled Mesoamerica, and you will delight in living the vida loca during the colorful Friday nights, which is like having a weekly spring break. And then, of course, there is the guacamole. So with that said, thank you so much for watching my video. There was a significant amount of research and production and taco eating that went into making this video possible. If you enjoy videos like this, please click the subscribe button and hit that notification bell. If you haven't seen already, check out my video on what is amazing about Peru, or 8 reasons why you should leave Mexico now. As always, stay happy and healthy, and stay tuned for another episode of Company Insight next week.